She had arranged the best rehabilitation team in all of Toronto, and still her father-in-law sat alone every night talking to no one. Nora Sutton came home on a Tuesday that she was not supposed to be home. The quarterly review in Vancouver had ended a day early. She had not told anyone. She had simply called the car service, boarded the red-eye, and arrived at the family house on Rosedale Valley Road just after 10 in the morning, with her coat still buttoned and her phone already lighting up with messages she had not read yet. The house was quiet in the way large houses are quiet. Not peaceful, just empty of noise while still full of everything else. She set her bag by the entrance and walked toward the kitchen, thinking about coffee, thinking about nothing in particular. That was when she heard it, laughter, coming from upstairs, low and uncertain, like someone testing a sound they had almost forgotten how to make. Nora set her keys on the hall table and stood still. Her father-in-law Franklin Sutton had not laughed in 11 months. Not since the stroke. Not since the left side of his face had gone slack and his right hand had stopped doing what he told it to do. The doctors said the brain was resilient. The therapist said he was making progress. The reports that arrived in her inbox every Friday said his coordination was improving. His language recovery was at 63%. His sleep was irregular but manageable. None of the reports mentioned laughter. She walked to the bottom of the staircase and looked up. The sound was coming from Franklin's room, the large room they had converted for him after the hospital discharge, with the hospital-grade bed and the mechanical chair and the intercom system that connected to the night nurses stationed down the hall. The door was half open. Nora climbed the stairs. She did not knock. She simply stopped in the doorway and looked. Franklin Sutton sat in his mechanical chair by the window, his back straighter than she had seen it in months. Beside him, cross-legged on the floor with a worn book open in her lap, was Delia. Delia was 31 years old and had been hired 8 months ago to manage general cleaning and light household tasks on the upper floor. She was not a nurse. She was not a therapist. She was not on any of the care team rosters that Nora kept filed on her desktop. Delia was reading aloud, slowly with deliberate gaps between certain words, and every time she paused, Franklin made a sound. Sometimes the right word, sometimes half of it, sometimes just a sound that was almost the shape of a word. When he got it, Delia looked up at him with her whole face and said, "There you go." And Franklin Sutton smiled with both sides of his mouth. That was what Nora had heard. That was the laughter. She stood in the doorway for a long moment and did not move. Franklin had not smiled with both sides of his mouth since before the stroke. She had not known he still could. She turned and walked back downstairs. She poured herself a glass of water instead of coffee, sat at the kitchen island, and stared at the stone countertop without seeing it. Outside, the maples along the drive had gone yellow and orange. It was the kind of October morning that made Toronto look like a painting. She had spent 7 years making this house beautiful. 7 years managing the details, the care team, the billing, the medical consults, the dietary adjustments, the weekly reports. Her husband Thomas called her the most organized person he had ever met. He meant it as a compliment. She had always accepted it as one. But sitting in the kitchen that morning, she could not remember the last time she had gone upstairs and simply sat beside Franklin. Not to check on him. Not to review his progress. Not to relay information to the nursing coordinator. Just sat beside him, the way she used to sit beside her own father when she was a girl, doing nothing in particular, just being there. She drank the water. It tasted like nothing. The next morning, Nora called Delia into the home office. The office was Thomas's originally, but he worked from the downtown firm 6 days a week and the room had become hers by default. Organized, precise, a place where things were tracked and managed. She sat behind the desk. Delia stood on the other side of it with her hands loosely at her sides. She was a composed young woman, unhurried, with the kind of steadiness that either meant she had nothing to hide or had decided that hiding was not worth the energy. "I saw you yesterday," Nora said, "in Franklin's room." Delia did not look away. "Yes, you were reading to him. Yes, that isn't part of your role." Delia looked at her for a moment before answering. "I know, your role is the upper floor, linens, surfaces, the guest bathroom. Coordinating with the laundry service on Thursdays, I know." Nora studied her. Most people when they sat across this desk, did one of 3 things. They explained themselves, they apologized, or they became smaller. Delia did none of these things. She simply waited with the particular calm of someone who had already made her peace with whatever was about to happen. That bothered Nora more than a defense would have. "The care team has a protocol," Nora continued. "Cognitive stimulation activities go through the occupational therapist. Language recovery is Dr. Whitmore's domain. There are liability reasons for those boundaries. I imagine you understand that I do. Then can you explain to me what I saw?" Delia took a breath. "He asked me to." The words were quiet. "They changed the room slightly." Nora leaned back. "He asked you?" "I was changing the towels in the hallway. He's just sitting in the doorway of his room watching me. He does that sometimes." A pause. "I don't think many people notice." Nora said nothing. "He had a book on his lap. One of those large hardcover ones, nature photography. He kept looking at it and then looking at me. So I asked if he wanted me to read the captions. Delia's voice was careful, not because she was afraid but because she was choosing her words with genuine attention. He said yes, or he said the sound that means yes. I wasn't always sure which words were coming, but he knew what he meant and I could follow along. That was 8 months ago? About 7. 7 months. The occupational therapist reports had mentioned patient engages positively with reading-based stimulation. Nora had read the line and moved on. She had not thought to ask what that meant on any given Thursday afternoon, or who it was who had made it happen on days the therapist wasn't there. How often, she asked. Most days that I'm here, an hour, sometimes more. We started with the nature book, then some gardening magazines he had in the box by the closet. Last month we moved to an old anthology. He used to be an English teacher. Did you know that? Nora was quiet. She had known. She had known it the way you know facts about someone you have never quite reached, catalogued but not felt. Franklin had been a high school English teacher in Sudbury for 30 years before he retired. Thomas had mentioned it once. She had filed it away. The anthology was his, Delia said. His name is on the inside cover in his own handwriting from before. Some of the poems he still knows by heart. Her voice softened. He gets frustrated when a word won't come, but he pushes through. The room was very quiet. He told me. Delia added, in the way he tells things now, slowly, with a lot of patience from both sides. He told me that in his old classroom he used to make his students read aloud. He believed that hearing a voice, a human voice, not a recording, helped language sit differently in the mind. Nora looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "You can go." Delia stood, nodded once and left without asking what would happen next. That bothered Nora too. She sat in the office for a while after the door closed. On her desk, the most recent care package invoice, the monthly nursing summary, a note from the physiotherapist about adjusting the Tuesday morning session. Hundreds of dollars a day, routed through the right providers, tracked in the right spreadsheets. And her father-in-law had learned, through 7 months of quiet afternoons with a housekeeper, that he could still feel the shape of a poem in his mouth. Nora opened her laptop. She looked at the screen. She did not type anything. Thomas called at noon. She told him the Vancouver meetings had gone well. She did not mention Delia. She did not mention what she had seen in the doorway. She said she was jet-lagged and would rest that afternoon. She did not rest. She sat in the kitchen and watched the October light shift across the back garden and thought about all the things the Friday reports did not include. They did not include the fact that Franklin watched people from his doorway when the hallway went quiet. They did not include the fact that he had a worn anthology in a box by his closet with his own name inside the cover. They did not include whether anyone had ever thought to open it. She went upstairs that evening just before supper. Franklin was in the chair by the window again, watching the garden in the gray light. He looked up when she came in, and something moved across his face. Not quite surprise, not quite hope, something more careful than either. "Hi, Franklin," she said. He made a sound. The left side of his face pulled slightly. The right said hello in the way it had relearned. She sat on the edge of the chair near the window. Not the armchair. The small wooden chair Delia must have pulled from the corner, because it was positioned at an angle that made it easy to speak to him directly without either person having to turn. She did not know what to say. That was the humiliating part. She had managed his care for 11 months. She had sat across conference tables from neurologists and argued for better protocol. She had learned the difference between expressive and receptive aphasia. She had built a system around his recovery that was genuinely good, genuinely thorough. And sit 2 feet from him in the October light, she had nothing. Franklin looked at her steadily. "I don't know how to do this," she said finally. "I don't know how to sit here without a goal." He watched her. There was no pity in it. "I'm not good at," she stopped. "I'm not good at being present without a purpose." Franklin made a sound. She leaned forward. He tried again slowly. The word came out almost right. "Neither." She looked at him. His mouth pulled into something that was almost a smile. He touched his chest lightly, with 2 fingers. "Me too," and something in that gesture broke through something she had not realized she had been holding. She laughed unexpectedly. Short and real, he laughed with her. They sat by the window until the supper tray came. She did not say much. He did not need her to. The nurse came at 7 and seemed surprised to find her there. Nora said goodnight to Franklin and walked downstairs feeling like a woman who had crossed a room she had been circling for 11 months. 3 days later, Nora called Delia into the office again. This time she did not sit behind the desk. She stood by the window with her arms crossed, then uncrossed them, then gestured to the 2 chairs near the bookshelves. They sat across from each other. It felt different. "I owe you an explanation," Nora said. Delia waited. "When I called you in the first time, I was going to give you a formal warning. Boundaries of role. Liability. Standard language." She paused. "I didn't, but I want you to know that was my intention." Delia nodded slowly. "I figured, what you've been doing for Franklin, I should have thanked you before I questioned you." Delia's expression shifted slightly. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. "How much of your own time?" Nora asked. Delia was still for a moment. "Some evenings, when his nights are harder. He has a night nurse." "Yes," a small pause. "The night nurse is very good. She checks his vitals and makes sure he has water and adjusts the pillow support. She's efficient. Delia seemed to choose her next words carefully. But when he wakes up confused, and he does, sometimes around 3, she comes in and takes his temperature and writes something down. And he's still confused, but now he's also alone in the fact of it. Nora was quiet. The first time I stayed, Delia said, was because I was here late finishing the linen rotation. I heard him. I just went in. I didn't think about whether I was supposed to. What did you do? Told him what time it was. Told him it was cold outside but the house was warm. Small things. She paused. He stopped being confused. Nora looked at her. You've been doing this on your own time, when I could. Nobody asked you to, nobody knew to ask. The words were simple and without accusation. That made them harder to hear. The room was very still. Nora thought about all the evenings she had come home from the office, and walked past Franklin's door and thought, the night nurse is there, the system is working, everything is covered. She thought about the word covered and how she had used it like a shield against something she did not want to name. She was afraid of him. Not of Franklin himself, but of what sitting beside him meant. Sitting beside him meant watching his hands shake when they used to be steady. It meant hearing the effort in every word, the long stretch of silence where language used to be. It meant accepting that the man who had raised her husband, who had held a classroom of teenagers, wrapped with poetry for 3 decades, was fighting for syllables, and she could not fix that by paying for the right specialist. She had dealt with it by managing it, by building the best care structure she knew how to build and staying one step back from the grief of it. Delia had done the opposite. She had stepped toward it and stayed. You should have been reimbursed, Nora said. For the books, the time. Delia shook her head slightly. That isn't why I did it. I know. But it still isn't right that you spent your own, Mrs. Sutton. Delia's voice was gentle. He was alone, that was the only reason. He was alone in a house full of people and I couldn't make myself walk past it. The sentence arrived quietly and settled somewhere Nora could not explain. She looked at the woman across from her and understood for the first time that she had not seen her clearly. She had seen her function. Reliable, unobtrusive, efficient. She had not asked where she was from, what her life was like outside this house, what she carried in with her every morning when she arrived. She had hired her through an agency and appreciated her for staying out of the way. Delia had not stayed out of the way. She had walked directly into the thing everyone else was carefully walking around. My grandfather had a stroke, Delia said quietly. When I was 15, in Oakville, my grandmother sat beside him every evening for 3 years. A pause. He outlived what the doctors expected by quite a bit. Nobody ever asked her why, but I always thought it was that. The sitting beside. Nora said nothing for a long moment. Did he recover his language? She asked. Delia smiled, small and real. Mostly. Enough to watch the game shows he loved and argue with the TV. She looked at her hands. He died on a Sunday morning. My grandmother was beside him, he knew. The office was very quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down Rosedale Valley Road. Somewhere in the house the heating system clicked on with a soft knock and hum. Nora uncrossed her ankles and stood. I'm going to talk to Thomas about your role, about what you've been doing. Delia looked at her steadily. Not to limit it, Nora said, to recognize it properly. She paused. And I owe Franklin an apology. Not a managed one, a real one. She went upstairs that afternoon without a reason. Franklin was sitting up in bed with the anthology open on his lap. He looked up when she came in. She sat in the wooden chair. She did not pull out her phone. She did not think about the time. Can I read with you? She asked. He looked at her for a moment. Then he held the book out toward her, open to a page she did not recognize, a poem in the middle of it that was marked faintly in pencil. Old graphite, almost invisible. Something he had marked long before she knew him. She started to write. Slowly. She left spaces. He came in when he could, and when he couldn't she waited, and when the word didn't come, they both let it go and moved forward together. After a while he fell asleep mid-page. She did not leave. She sat there in the October afternoon with the book in her hands, and the quiet sound of his breathing in the room, and she understood something she had been too busy to learn for 11 months. That her presence was not just comfort. It was evidence. It told him that he was still worth sitting beside. Thomas came home that evening to find her still upstairs. He stood in the doorway of his father's room with his coat still on and his briefcase in his hand. And the expression on his face was something Nora had not seen in a long time. She thought it might be relief. How long have you been up here? He said. A while, she said. He set the briefcase down in the hallway and came into the room. He pulled the footstool close and sat beside her without asking whether to stay. Franklin slept through it. The room was the kind of quiet that asks nothing of you. Later, when the nurse had come and gone and Franklin was settled for the night, they went downstairs together. Nora told Thomas about Delia. All of it, the 7 months of reading aloud, the evenings, the 3 in the morning, the tea. The anthology with Franklin's name on the inside cover. Thomas did not speak for a long time after she finished. I didn't know any of that, he said finally. Neither did I. He was quiet again. Then, you're going to keep her on. I'm going to ask her to stay, Nora said. And pay her properly for what she's actually been doing. Thomas looked at the wall. He had the same jaw as his father. She had always loved that about him. "I haven't been up there enough," he said. "Neither have I." He turned and looked at her. What changed? Nora thought about it honestly. "I came home on the wrong day," she said. "Or the right one." What happened over the following weeks was not dramatic. There was no single moment of transformation that could be pointed to or framed. It was smaller than that and therefore more real. Nora started going upstairs in the evening. Not every evening but most. Sometimes she read. Sometimes she and Franklin simply sat in the room while the October light went, and the November gray came in through the curtains. Sometimes she brought up the soup she had made downstairs, and they ate together by the window, and he told her things in the halting, effortful way he told things now, and she learned to slow her own listening until it matched his pace. She learned that he did not like the ceiling light in the evening. She learned that the wool blanket on the left side of the closet was the one he actually wanted, not the cashmere one the home care coordinator had ordered, which was too slippery and kept sliding off. She learned that he liked the window cracked a little even in November, and that the sound of the street below, quiet traffic, the occasional dog, footsteps on the sidewalk, seemed to help him sleep. She had been managing his care for 11 months. She was only now beginning to know him. Thomas started coming up on Saturday mornings. He brought his coffee. He would sit with Franklin and tell him about the week, the cases he couldn't share details of and the ones he could, the city news, the hockey results. Franklin would listen with his eyes very bright, and sometimes he would say 2 words or 3 in a row that all arrived cleanly. And Thomas would act as though this was entirely normal, and in that normalcy Franklin seemed to grow a little more solid. Delia kept her role, but Nora formalized something she should have formalized long before. She spoke to the home care coordinator, added a companion support line to the budget, and ensured that Delia was compensated for the hours she had been quietly giving for months. Delia accepted this without ceremony. She thanked Nora once and did not mention it again. What she did continue to do, unrequested and untracked, was notice things. She noticed when Franklin's breakfast tray sat untouched and understood before anyone else that it wasn't appetite loss but the particular spoon, which was too light and kept slipping from his hand. She swapped it for a heavier one from the kitchen drawer, without writing a report or flagging a concern. She noticed when the afternoon light hit a certain angle that made him squint with discomfort, and moved his chair slightly to the left. She noticed when he was pretending not to be tired, so that whoever was visiting would not feel they had to leave. She noticed, in other words, the things that no chart could ask and no system could track. The small living details of a person still in the middle of being a person. One evening in late November, Nora found a piece of paper on the hall table outside Franklin's room. Delia had written on it in careful block letters, a note from Franklin, transcribed because his handwriting was still coming back. "Tell her the anthology is hers. I want her to keep reading it when I am gone." Nora stood in the hallway for a long time. She did not tell herself that he was giving up. She knew Franklin well enough now to understand it differently. Not as resignation, but as a kind of deliberate generosity. He was putting things in order with intention, not despair. He was making sure that something of his went to someone who had understood it. She knocked on his door that evening, and when she went in, she sat on the wooden chair and held the note in her lap. "Did you want me to read it to you?" she asked. "The anthology. More of it?" He looked at the book on the nightstand. He looked at her. He said the word clearly, fully, one of the clearest he had managed in months. Yes. She opened it to the page with the old pencil mark. She read. He came in on certain lines, the ones he knew from before, the ones that were still fully there, and she left room for him every time. The night nurse passed in the hallway. The house ticked and settled around them. Somewhere outside, the first snow of the season was beginning to come down over Rosedale, soft and unhurried. Nora read until he fell asleep, and then she stayed a little longer. Because she had learned by then that it was the staying that mattered most. Franklin Sutton died on a Thursday in January before the worst of the winter arrived. It was not unexpected, it was still a blow. The house felt different in the days afterward, not empty exactly but rearranged in some way she did not have language for yet. At the small gathering afterward, one of Thomas's aunts pulled Nora aside and said, with the mild accusatory warmth of long family knowledge, that Franklin had seemed different in his last months. More settled. She used the word peaceful, which she seemed to mean as a question. Nora said yes, he had been. The aunt asked what had changed. Nora thought about how to answer that honestly. He wasn't alone in the evenings anymore, she said. The aunt nodded as though this explained less than she had hoped. Nora did not elaborate. Delia was there that day, standing near the back of the room in a dark coat. At one point she caught Nora's eye and gave the small, contained nod of someone who does not want to take up space in someone else's grief. Nora crossed the room to her. "Thank you," she said. "For the months before I understood what you were doing." Delia said, "He was a good person to sit beside." There was nothing more to say and they both knew it. 6 months later the upstairs room was different, not gutted. Franklin's books remained on the shelves, his chair was still by the window. But the mechanical bed was gone, and the room breathed differently without it. Nora found herself going in there sometimes. Not to do anything. Just to sit in the wooden chair that had been repositioned over the months, to face the window at exactly the angle that caught the afternoon light without the glare. The anthology sat on the nightstand where it always had. She had kept reading it. That surprised her. Not to finish it, not for any reason she could name. Only because it connected her to the version of herself who had finally learned, too late and also just in time, that love was not a system. It could not be organized, delegated or filed under, adequately managed. It was the sound of a voice reading aloud in an empty hallway. It was a spoon switched out without fanfare. It was the decision, made again and again, to stay in the room rather than the doorway. It was in the end, the only thing that had ever actually mattered. And she had needed a young woman with a worn anthology and a memory of her own grandfather to teach her that. Nora stayed in the room until the light shifted. Then she stood, placed the anthology carefully back on the nightstand, and walked out with the door open behind her. Because Franklin had never liked it closed. Some things, once you learn them, you do not forget.